The content of this podcast includes topics that may be difficult for some people to confront or discuss. These conversations can be triggering. If you are underage, please speak to your guardian before continuing.
You don't need your child's endorsement to get them the help that they need. And I often have parents who feel like, well, she said she'll only go to a nutritionist, or she said she'll only go to a young therapist, or only someone with red hair, or someone with blue eyes. They're so busy trying to make the child happy that they don't want to upset them, that they're losing sight of what's really going on. Like I say clearly to parents, if you thought your child had a brain tumor, would you be, not taking her out of school because you don't want to upset her and make her miss class?
In this week's episode of That's an Issue, we talk about a very serious topic, eating disorders. Now, I just saw a stat that more than 9% of Americans struggle with eating disorders at one point in their life, and that's a wild number. Even if it was 1%, that would be too high. It's something that affects a lot of Americans, but frankly, the world, and unfortunately, a lot of from people. There might be someone in your life that you actually know that struggles with this eating disorder, but more likely there are people in your life that you don't even realize that they're struggling with that. And this is a conversation that's important, whether you yourself might unfortunately struggle with the eating disorder, or maybe you don't really know anyone that does, but you might. So we sat down with Relief's very own Devorah Levinson to have a conversation with her and the work that she does to help educate people about eating disorders and everything there is to it. So here is this week's episode.
Mental health, relationships, those are loaded topics and something that affects every part of our lives. But we aren't having enough open conversations about it.
And that's an issue.
Welcome to That's an Issue. We have with us today Devorah Levinson, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, so I work for Relief Resources, and we do mental health referrals for the Orthodox Jewish community. My specialty is actually I do adult referrals for ages 15 and up, but specifically I deal with the eating disorder referrals. When they hired me 14 years ago, they recognized that eating disorders are a lot more complex than many of the other mental health issues, and they wanted one person specifically to be as knowledgeable as possible in eating disorders and as knowledgeable as possible in different treatment options. So I give the most important thing we do, of course, is I give the referrals to treatment providers and facilities, but I also do a lot of educating parents, explaining to them the process, and we, in that vein of that type of work, we've also had the opportunity to go to different facilities and do cultural presentations, teaching the clinicians, not Judaism 101, but what do they need to know to help the Orthodox patients move forward. So I do a lot of cultural presentations as well, and in addition to some prevention things. So it's a lot of fun stuff.
Okay, wow. So 14 years. So that's
right. Yeah, it'll be 14 years
doing this.
January 1st.
Okay.
January 1st will be 14 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah, so
exactly.
That's a lot of knowledge in a specific field. So
it really was fantastic, because I think, one of the fabulous things about Relief is that a lot of the top names in the field of mental health, and I'm not trying to give a shameless plug, but a lot of the top names in the field of mental health really like what we do and respect it and respect us and what we're trying to achieve. And they're so excited when we ask them questions and we want to learn more. And I've had the opportunity to really be involved with many, many experts. And so much of our training is really being able to confer and to talk to them and to learn from them. And I have the opportunity actually every week for the last, I think, 8 or 9 years now. Dr. Catherine Loeb, who's just an expert in eating disorders and women's mental health, she actually gives an hour a week for me to consult with her on the different cases that I'm dealing with. And again, I'm not a clinician, but, in giving me guidance on what it can be recommending, how I can better handle it, how I can better help families navigate this. So we really do have had the opportunity to learn a tremendous amount in that time.
Okay.
So it's been great.
Okay, so we want to hear a lot more about your knowledge on this topic. So I'll jump in with our first question.
Please.
Can you define for us what's considered an eating disorder?
So, I mean, if we're going to look at the DSM for the actual diagnostic criteria, the main eating disorders that people are talking about and are worried about are anorexia, bulimia, and then there's also binge eating disorder, which, can have its own challenges, but isn't as immediately life-threatening. And then there's also something called ARFID. ARFID is less common, but it's, occurring much more in younger kids. And that's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is more of the picky eaters, gone wrong. But the main ones I think that we really want to discuss today are probably anorexia and bulimia. Anorexia is the disorder where a person is restricting. They've cut down their food groups. They've cut down their caloric intake to the point that they've lost a significant amount of weight in a short amount of time. And in young women, it will have medical repercussions as well. The menstrual cycle will stop. Other issues is that they can have low heart rate. And really, again, another one of the reasons why they wanted someone to specifically deal with eating disorders is because of all the mental health issues. We'll do a trivia question here. Of all the mental health issues, and I mean the big ones, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, can you name the illness that has the highest mortality rate?
I'm going to let Yoni answer because I know the answer.
Highest mortality.
Highest mortality.
Like meaning
rate.
death.
Mortality. Yes,
Right.
I understood the word. I would say,
Do you have a drum roll?
Yeah, give your best guess.
is it like addiction, like
It's an
opioid?
eating disorder. Eating disorders have the highest
Anorexia.
mortality rate.
Yeah.
It's-
Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate. So that's really the challenge in that it's a mental health issue, but there's a very strong medical component. So anorexia, like I said, is the restricting. And they have anorexia as well is egosyntonic. So that means it really takes over the person's thinking. So there's a lot of denial, a lot of failure to recognize the problem. They'll think that they're heavy, even when they're really so dangerously thin. Bulimia is where someone can even be overweight, where they eat and then they vomit afterwards. As a form of weight loss or also as a form of emotion regulation sometimes as well. So a bulimic is easier to hide because people don't necessarily see the weight loss. They don't see that change. I've had cases of, I had a young woman, she was in her mid-30s. And again, this was, we were talking before we started about, the benefits of the internet and how people are looking up mental health issues. And she had been searching and Googling, and she saw a lot of the medical danger with what she was doing. She'd been bulimic since she was 16. Her husband didn't even know. She was married with children. Her husband, she'd kept it a secret the entire time.
What did we say bulimic was again?
Wow.
That's
Throwing up after eating. So it was a form of managing her weight. It was a form of managing her moods, but mostly kind of keeping her weight in check for all these years. And it was something that she kept a secret. So bulimia is sometimes harder to tell. Someone can be underweight, they can also be overweight, but they could still, be doing this.
Why is that a problem to be bulimic?
Bulimic, because it has its own medical complications in that, aside from swollen glands, strep
teeth.
throat more often, right? Issues with teeth, with the teeth eroding from the acids that they're throwing. It also, it lessens the potassium and electrolytes in a person's body, and that can actually cause a heart attack. I had a young woman who actually had a heart attack a number of years ago on Ocean Parkway. She was, I think, in her late 20s, early 30s. And that was just from being bulimic. So it can be just as life-threatening, but it's harder to notice. So really anorexia and bulimia, I'd say, are the big eating disorders. Binge eating disorder, is really where someone, not, I ate too much at the kiddush, but they'll have specific episodes, mostly in private, late at night, where they'll just eat excessive amounts of food, kind of losing touch with reality almost to such an extent. And I'm not saying just eating the extra piece of cake, but the entire cake and the whole bag of chips and the ice cream to the point that they really feel ill, but they don't purge afterwards. So that's binge eating disorder. And ARFID, just like I mentioned briefly, that is, I'm getting a lot more of those cases. And it's interesting because it's coming more with boys as well, around the age of 9 or 10. But that's really the picky eating, like, gone wrong, where it's not just, I only like a certain food. It's like, I'll only have the schnitzel, but if there's something black on it, I won't touch it. I'll only have the frozen pizza, but it's got to be that company. If this touched my food, I can't eat it. I've had boys who, like, no one in the family is allowed to eat fleischigs near them, or they have to, like, hold besamim because the smell is so bad. So most of the time it's like the parents that are just going crazy. The kid's fine as long as mom can make everything exactly the way they want. But ARFID is when they're not reaching their growth milestones and and it's getting too extreme and they're not continuing to progress developmentally and physically. So it's more of an anxiety-based disorder. It doesn't have that same fear of fat, but it still is considered an eating disorder as well.
Okay.
So that's the eating disorders.
Okay, so I want to take a step back, I guess.
Sure.
So I think a lot of people could see themselves in certain ones of the symptoms that you spoke about, right? So let's say people who are on extreme diets or things like that. Let's not say not for the person themselves, but for someone who knows them. When would you be concerned if someone is always constantly dieting and talking about being skinnier? When would you say maybe they have an eating disorder?
Right. So nowadays, I would say most people are dieting and most people want to be skinny. It's sort of a problem. I think worldwide, and not especially in the Orthodox community, but we're not excluded from that. The appearance ideal is something that really knows no bounds, and no one is immune. But I think there's a sort of a level of disordered eating, we call it, that's within normal range. It's unfortunate if someone is constantly on diets and constantly unhappy with how they look, but it's sort of within normal range. It's with anything. We all have a little OCD. Right? We all have a little anxiety. Right. So when does it become a problem? When it starts to impact our daily functioning, right? So firstly, it's going to be medical. That's going to be our first thing. Are they losing excessive amounts of weight? Are they having any health issues, right? That's number one. Is this causing any type of health repercussions? That would be number one. But then also, how much is it occupying their headspace? How busy are they miserable because they're unhappy with how they look? Are they constantly weighing themselves multiple times during the day? Are they, so unhappy with what they ate? Are they making negative comments constantly? Is it really impacting their daily functioning?
So
is it really taking the quality of life? Exactly.
Piece versus just, okay, this is something I think about here and there, or I try.
Right.
But it's the obsessiveness.
But it's really that medical. I would say the thing that crosses the line is going to be the medical, right? If they're not, look, some people, they don't lose any excessive amounts of weight because I just lost 5 pounds and now I gained 10 pounds. And then I lost 5 pounds and then I gained 12 pounds. So, they sort of stay in a kind of unhappy baseline. But it's mostly how much is it impacting the daily function. But it's interesting because we just, thankfully we just expanded. I was the only person, I used to laugh. I was the director of the eating disorder division and I directed me, myself and I. And now we finally, thankfully, due to a very, very generous donor, we were able to hire someone that works together with me. And one of the first things we did is we needed to, really clean up all of our resources and our names in the database. And we actually were making a new criteria called disordered eating. Because there are therapists that aren't necessarily trained to treat eating disorders, but they can do body image, they can do disordered eating. So for those people that it's not necessarily meeting criteria, but they're unhappy with it. Why is my body and my weight making me feel so unhappy? Why am I letting that happen? So we sort of put that criteria in there, and we are seeing that that is a challenge as well.
Okay, so that number I'm sure is much higher. Disordered eating in terms of percentages would be much higher.
But I think it's also, people have to realize that they're unhappy with it. So many people think this is just part of life.
The norm.
Right? This is just part of life. What do you mean? Of course, we're always on diets. And of course, if you see someone, the first thing you're going to say is, wow, did you lose weight? You look great. That's the compliment. So much of it has just become part of regular life without us recognizing it. So it's really, when you're talking about numbers, it's going to be only those people that recognize, this really this sucks. This is just not a way to live. So, So I think there are definitely a lot of people like that out there, but not necessarily a lot of people who recognize that it's a problem.
Okay. Have you seen the numbers of eating disorders going up in the past 14 years?
I definitely have. That's always the question, when we talk about data. There have been different people who've said, eating disorders are higher in the Orthodox community than they are in the secular community. You can't prove it. You really can't. Mm-hmm. There's no singular group that they can poll. You can't walk into Satmar and you can't walk into, Hafter, and you can't walk into these places and say, can I take a poll of all your students and see who has eating disorders? No one's going to answer, right? Mm-hmm. So I really feel like the relief record keeping system is kind of like the only window, accurate window into mental health issues within the Orthodox community, because every call is put into the system, right? If you call me about your next door neighbor, that is a case, and that case goes into the system. So I have a record of how many people called, in regards to anxiety, depression, OCD, postpartum, whatever it is. So all of my eating disorder cases, they're all logged. So when I started, it was like 12 a month, 12 new cases a month. Now we're up to about 30.
Wow.
Now we're up to about 30.
More than double.
Right. So, but then are the numbers higher because more people are recognizing it? There's more awareness, more people are reaching out, or are the numbers higher because there's more? So that's also, the challenge in trying to figure out those things. But it's definitely going up. And now with COVID also, I think we're almost up to like 290 for the year, and we're just in November, and that's like really high.
Right.
That's really high. So it definitely is a lot more. But I like to think, it's the same thing when Rabbi Babad tells people how many cases, general mental health cases we do a month, it's like, oh my gosh, like what's happening to the world? And I really say it means there's a lot of people that are reaching out for help.
Right. It's not like a negative.
But there's definitely, it's definitely an issue out there. It's definitely an issue out there, and it's not going away.
Speaking of studies, I just remembered this. I know someone who did for their dissertation a study on eating disorder, different eating disorder symptoms, things like that. And she compared a modern Orthodox school to a Beis Yaakov. She didn't find any differences, as far as I remember. But what she did find that was different was the Beis Yaakov kids. She had asked some questions about shidduchim, and like they were much more nervous about it. Like that was on their mind in terms of weight, was for shidduchim, and she did this in high schools.
Right.
So, like, does that play into it at all, like this?
So I think, look, shidduchim have been around for centuries, right? The system of shidduchim has been around for centuries, and you can weigh in on this. The guys always wanted the pretty girl, right? So what's really changed isn't the system of shidduchim. What's changed is our perception of what constitutes a pretty girl. Years ago, I think, in our prevention program, which if we have time to touch on, I'll mention, but, we quote the Gemara in Shabbos, and again, you'll tell me if I'm wrong as the designated male in the room, but the Gemara in Shabbos talks about how women used to wear choker necklaces, right, to accentuate their fat, because that was considered healthy, that was considered attractive. After World War II, people didn't want skinny women. Right. They wanted heavy women, right? Because that was health, that was vibes. And even in the secular world, who was the vision of beauty back then? Marilyn Monroe, right? Marilyn Monroe would be considered overweight according to today's models. So it's not that shidduchim is creating more of a pressure and creating more eating disorders. We've always wanted the pretty girl, but the pretty girl, the vision of the pretty girl is what's changed.
Right, and it's become like almost unrealistic.
It's not almost, completely unrealistic. Okay. Completely unrealistic, because not everyone can be a size 0. It's just not, that's not the case. I once saw an advertisement, it was for eating disorder awareness or something, and it had a woman standing there wearing denim pants and said, be comfortable in your jeans. Meaning your genetic makeup, because so many people just don't understand that, they don't get that. And I use this as an example when I talk to moms, because I get a lot of calls like 12 to 14. I'm getting more of those calls where they're just starting with the eating disorder issues and starting with the problems, and the mothers aren't fully understanding even just normal adolescent growth and development. And I say that, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old basically looks like you took a baby and an adult and you squashed them together. Right? Just awkward, chubby parts in weird places, and I remember when my daughter was, her 8th grade graduation, she went to a very, very large elementary school, and you were able to really compare and contrast what do 13-year-olds look like. And there were some 13-year-olds that looked like they were 9, and some 13-year-olds that looked like they were 22. And that was all normal. But these girls don't see that. They see the little skinny stick girl, and that's who they feel they have to look like. And they don't understand that their body is different, and they don't understand that their body's growing. So they start to feel awkward. They start to feel uncomfortable. They get hungrier because they're about to go through this fabulous journey called puberty and adolescence, where their body is growing until the age of, they say now brain is developing until like 23. I have young adults. I think their brains are still developing. They're past 23. But anyway, so, they need to be hungry because they have to be eating, because they have to sustain themselves. So you've got these kids who feel super awkward in their bodies, these semi-baby adult looking people. You've got mothers who get nervous because all of a sudden their kid's hungry all the time. And they're thinking shidduchim as well, because what happens? Because our vision of beauty has changed. So you're just like setting the stage for either a full-blown eating disorder or this really unhappy person, because being a Jewish woman, our life is always about getting pregnant and losing the weight and having a baby and losing the weight and having another baby and losing the weight. And that's normal. So if you're going to go through life constantly judging yourself and feeling unhappy, it's just, that's also, something that we really want to try and avoid.
So you mentioned some great points there, but I just want to ask you a question on something you said. So obviously I'm not a doctor, but what I thought of when I, hear of some of these eating disorders like anorexia, I thought that it was a control thing. So when a person is a young adult and they have issues they can't control, so let's say it's a male, right? You'll find this when someone's very angry, have an interesting home, and they need to let it out, let out that frustration. They'll go to a gym and, use that to control their body because they have a lot of control over how the weights, what they intake, and building that muscle mass gets that control back into their lives.
Right.
Is it possible that although certain things like body image, and pressures from, society of what society views or what, shidduchim, as we shifting the blame on the men here. I'm trying to shift the blame away and say that maybe it's a control thing, just like men go to the gym to work out. Maybe frustrated young adult women are trying to control the thing that they can control, and that's their bodies, and they do that in a negative way.
So there's definitely a big aspect of control, but I wouldn't say that that's the case for every single eating disorder. I can have 5 girls standing in front of me, and they can all have the exact same symptoms, and each one is coming from a different place. Like, you have to have the fertile ground to develop an eating disorder, and then it gets triggered. So the 5 girls, I can have one of them who, let's say, was type A personality, perfectionist. I can have another one who has OCD, another one who was, God forbid, sexually abused, another one whose parents got divorced, situational things, another one who has bipolar disorder, right? And then it gets triggered into that eating disorder. Now, when you do restrict, it does release endorphins in your brain. So just like when you're exercising, you're releasing the endorphins, it's doing something for you. It's actually good for your mood when you do exercise to some extent. So when you restrict, it does do something, but the more you do it, then the more anxious, the more rigid, the more obsessive, and the more depressed you become. So, it can go too far. So I'm not going to say that no one does it for control, but I'm not going to say it's a completely control issue as well. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism perhaps, but, it develops a life of its own, especially the anorexia. When it comes to bulimia, I do believe there is much more of an emotion regulation piece to it. And if you think about it, if you ever were sick to your stomach and then you finally threw up, you're like, there is this sort of level of a release afterwards. So a lot of times, when someone is very anxious and is very overwhelmed or is very upset, throwing up is an unhealthy way, that maladaptive coping mechanism for that emotion. I have had many cases where girls who were purging were also self-harming and had challenges with that as well. So it definitely does something for people. The question is what? And I'm not 100% certain they're confident that we can make a blanket statement about that.
So is there an average age where an eating disorder would develop? Like you said, that 12 to 14.
Right. So that's another great thing with our data. So, again, the question is, when did it develop or when did we hear about it? Okay. Right? So it really does seem to develop the majority of cases. I think it's about 35%, 36% of our cases are this 12 to 17-year-old. Okay. So again, that's when they call us. So it could be they had a 17-year-old had it for 3 years. It could be, it was longer, but that's when they're calling us. And then I'd say it's about 20 something, 25% are the 18 to 24. And then the variety of other ages, again, the ones that are a little bit younger with the ARFID ones and the older ones have probably had it for a really long time. So really that's also why I do spend a lot more, a nice amount of my time, not as much as I would like, on prevention, because that's the fabulous thing also. I mean, eating disorders have the highest mortality rate, right? But they also have the ability to be prevented. And there's a tremendous amount of research that's been done to show that, we talk about the 5 girls I have standing in front of me, right? I can't prevent their parents from getting divorced. I can't prevent bipolar disorder. I can't unfortunately can't prevent the girl got sexually abused. I can't prevent those things from happening, but I can prevent that trigger from becoming the eating disorder. And what's that trigger? And the research is what shows us that the trigger is this belief that if I would be skinny, then I would be happier. I would be this, I would be that. I would be more in control. I would, have more friends. I'd be more popular. More people would like me. My life would be better. So if we can stop this, it's called the thin ideal internalization, right? If we can stop that from happening and we can improve their body image and they're taking better care of themselves, then we can really prevent the eating disorder from developing. So
but that isn't true.
What?
Is that true?
Yes. Yes. We've got data. We've got published author.
No. What I'm saying is it true that a person is not happier when they are skinnier? It sounds like a crazy question, but it
sounds like a little bit of a sad question. I can hear why you're asking it, but it sounds a little bit of a sad question.
Not to put down anyone, but I'm saying, let's say for people who, I'm just thinking from a guy's perspective, let's say working out.
Right.
Like people who work out and their bodies are fit and they're in shape, they claim to be happier, and that would not be a problem.
But if they were obsessed with it and felt they had to do it,
many guys work 3 hours in the gym.
But are they?
And they're happier, and they like their body image, and they say that they were less secure prior to working out, and that's why
How would they feel if they couldn't work out one day? Well, how would that affect them?
They complain about it. I mean, this is something in yeshiva that guys who are in the gym are in the gym, and they love it. Even out of yeshiva, folks that like the gym love the gym, and they say it has all of these positives. So I'm not pushing back on I'm just questioning is having not only you were skinny but healthy, and in turn not.
It's also that's an external. That's something that's externally boosting them up. That's not something that's coming from an internal thing. Meaning, if I go to the gym and I feel good because I go to the gym, and my body feels strong and I'm growing muscles and I feel good about myself and I'm moving and I'm more flexible and I can do more things, right? And I feel good about myself that I have that motivation. That's more internal. If I'm looking and I like how I look and I'm busy with how I look, and if I can't go and my look isn't that certain way, or today I looked a little bloated, or the next day, I ate something and then I didn't look just the right way, or, and I'm constantly second guessing that, and it's all about the look, that's external. So I think what you're describing is still more of an external thing. I mean, it's really, it's how does it make you feel internally, and how confident do you feel because of that? I think that's really the difference. So it's not, we have to understand that yes, we're always going to want to look good. I don't think that's not going to change. And that's not the goal of this program is not, they have all this body positivity now. And I think people need to feel good about themselves, but it's impossible to say, I completely love my body and every single piece of it, and I think that I'm fantastic and perfect. That's unrealistic. What we want is to help people understand that my feelings of self-worth should not be unduly attached to my appearance. That, it shouldn't be, that I am constantly feeling judged by myself and my perception of how I look and how the people around me think I look. That's really the difference. Does that answer your question?
Maybe.
Can I say something else? So, skinny does not equal healthy.
Right.
That's another thing.
Okay. Saying
someone could be skinny and be completely unhealthy, feel horrible, get stomach aches,
saying
headaches.
And that's a perfect that's a perfect thing that you just mentioned that, because that's really one of the things I have to explain to parents a lot of the time, because they'll tell me, well, she just wanted to be healthy. And I'll say, but based on what you're telling me, it sounds more like she wanted to be skinny. And that, well, she was just choosing healthy foods. Well, was she choosing healthy foods or was she choosing low calorie foods? And that's, and maybe we'll edit this part out. My kids want me to edit it out. But there's a movie, I'm not going to say the title, and I'm not going to say if I watched it or I didn't watch it, but there was a movie, and the premise behind the movie was there was a chubbier woman who had a low self-esteem and didn't feel good and wasn't successful at work and didn't have a boyfriend. And she hit her head one day in the gym. Magically, all of a sudden, she thought she was gorgeous. And even though she wasn't, meaning she was a pretty young woman, but, even though nothing had changed for her aesthetically, but all of a sudden she felt confident with herself. She felt good about herself. She did better at work. She was able to put her ideas through because she wasn't so self-conscious. She developed a romantic relationship. She found a boyfriend. Feeling better about herself, improved so many aspects of her life. So that's really what poor body image is. It's when it stops us from living our full life because it is so connected to other things. When you walk into a room, and you feel confident, how different would your day be? If you woke up in the morning and you felt, I look really great today, regardless of how your sheitel came out or regardless of if that skirt fit you or not, but you just felt good about yourself, how different would your relationships be with other people? How different would you, how much more successful would you be in life as a whole? So that's really what the prevention is about, in that, kind of disconnecting your appearance from your feelings of self-worth. And even if there are parts, like I said, there are parts of you that, I don't like my nose or I don't like my ears, that's fine. You may never love them, but it shouldn't impact, your intrinsic feelings of worth and value. And that's also one of the interesting things about the program is people say, well, what about obesity, right? If we have everybody thinking they're fine the way they are, obesity is an epidemic, obesity kills. And really what they found is that this program actually prevents obesity as well, because when you feel better about yourself, you're more likely to take better care of yourself. You're less likely to do unhealthy things like yo-yo dieting and these really restrictive things, and you'll ultimately be healthier.
Could we talk a little bit more about this program that you're mentioning?
Yes.
Okay, I guess tell us what it's about, like what ages, like how this works.
So that's another, like I said, one of the great things about my job. Put in another shameless plug. I always say Rabbi Babad's philosophy for relief is anything you could do to help Klal Yisrael, do it as long as you have time and it doesn't cost me any money. That's that's kind of how things work. So in my work with Dr. Catherine Loeb, several years ago, I had the opportunity she had a PhD student who was doing her thesis or whatever it was, and she wanted to take a gold standard eating disorder prevention program from the secular world, and she wanted to adapt it from community and do a study to see if it would be as effective. So there's something called the Body Project. It's been given to over 1 million students already. They did it initially for college-age students, and she wanted to do a cultural adaptation. So I was brought in as the cultural consultant to try and kasher it, like make it applicable to from girls. So we did this adaptation. A lot of stopping and starting because it was always a spare project. Again, Rabbi Bad said only if you have time. So it took time until we kind of got it off the ground, but we, together with the originators of the program, Eric Stice was one of the main developers of the original Body Project. We took our adaptation and we did a pilot study and went to a school. We did it with 82 students. We did pre-measures, we did post-measures. You're a PsyD, so you'll get all this. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea.
Like a measurement,
like they test them before and after to see the difference.
Right, they give like a questionnaire before.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about like the body weight or something, measurement. I'm like, I don't know.
So we did pre-measures, we did post-measures, and we did 6-month follow-up. And it was amazing.
How old were these students?
So we did it with 11th graders.
Okay.
We did it with 11th graders, and we really got great results. And they were so tough. They were such a tough crowd. They were the toughest crowd because I actually went into the class. It was myself and Dr. Sarah Markowitz, who was a former student of Catherine Loeb. And we split up the 11th grade. She took 4 classes. I took 4 classes. And we gave it ourselves. The real program now is based on a train the trainers model where someone from the school, I train them and then they go and do in the class. So it was I was like a substitute teacher walking in from a different community, and trying to talk about private things. So it was like they were so tough. I remember there was one part of the program where they do what's it called? They give suggestions of things you can do to promote better body image, and one of them was put up Post-it notes in the bathroom that say, you're beautiful the way you are. And I remember the girls getting so upset. But what if you're not? What if she's really not? And we don't tell her that she's really not beautiful. And she's going to go around thinking she's beautiful and being unhealthy. They were so tough. It was the hardest thing, and it was just fantastic. But the amazing thing was that it worked. It worked. We got great results. It improved body dissatisfaction. It improved their mood affect, and also it decreased the thin ideal internalization.
Wow.
So, which was really, really fantastic. So now we had this program, and then we had to. So it was we had I don't say the cure for eating disorders. We had the prevention for eating disorders was like a pill the size of a soccer ball, right? So now we had to shrink it down to get it so schools could more easily, take it. So what we do now is I go to the school if a school's interested, and I'm not doing a shameless plug for this, but I'm just telling you about it because I love it and I'm excited. But I go to the school, I train the staff. So again, this is all with Eric Stice's blessing. And we teach the staff how to give this over. So it's different than the original program, because the original program was for college students who volunteered. Right? Okay. Meaning they put up like signs in a sorority. Anyone with body image concerns who wants to come to a group, come to a group. Right? You can't put up a sign like that in a Beis Yaakov school. So we made it mandatory. The whole class has to participate. So So we've changed parts of it. And then there were parts, like I remember when we did the training, it was like he was preaching to the choir, the day he trained us. It was myself and Dr. Loeb and two of her research assistants and Sarah Markowitz. And it's like any point where you were supposed to say, oh, would this be a good answer? Everybody said, oh, would this be a good answer? And then you're in a classroom, especially like a class of frum kids, right? And it's like, I don't know. So we added parts to it as well, sort of like teacher tips, like how to engage them a little bit more. But we even had to change the name, again, with Eric's permission, because Dr. Loeb is just such a scientist and she has to follow every single rule. The schools didn't like the name The Body Project. Okay. Because we can't say body in some schools. So we changed it to Project Everybody.
Oh, cute.
That's very cute.
Yeah, it's a great name.
So is it still for high schools?
Yes, it is for high school.
Okay. Is that not too late? Right. Based on what you were saying before? So
look, we would love to change the world as soon as we could. But really this type of program, the kids have to have a level of maturity and cognitive ability. They have to.
And in middle school won't?
Middle school, it's too young. I really think like 10th grade and up. 9th grade is pushing it a little bit. Like it really depends on the class. But it's based on the philosophy behind this is cognitive dissonance. And for the gentleman in the room who may not know what cognitive dissonance is, it's when you do or say things or you act in a way that's against your core beliefs, right? So if you do something opposite to what you believe, it creates this dissonance, this discomfort, and you've got to either change your core beliefs or stop doing those things. So it gets them to change their core beliefs that being thin is the answer to everything, which, is basically the Torah principle. Everything comes from the Torah of hachitzonias mereres hapnimas. The outside influences the inside. So,
and this is the therapy that works for all these disorders, you think, after a person recognizes that they have them, saying this is the therapy that they go through?
So this is really what changes their core beliefs. The therapy for eating disorder is completely different. But this
let's ask about that after.
Yeah.
Right. But this is really what, works on those negative, body image pieces there. But what was so great though, so again, we did this with 82 students. We collected all the data. We published it. I'm a published author. Again, I'm
very nice.
Yeah, so she could appreciate it. You're like the same thing like Rabbi Babad. That and $1.50 will get you a cup of coffee. What does that really do? But it was exciting. It was exciting to be part of that. That we have that. But time-wise, it takes a lot of effort to reach out to schools, and a lot of schools aren't comfortable. I think I was a little naive when we first did the adaptation, because I thought like every school could do this. Like we'll go to Satmar, we'll go to Lakewood, we'll go everywhere, we'll do everything. We're going to just totally fix the world. And a lot of schools are like, I'm not so sure if we want that. So it's there is still a hesitation there.
You think if the parent body was very on board, that would...
Look, I definitely think...
We have people listening to this. Hopefully we're going to make some changes here.
For sure. Look, I definitely think if the parents, would, wanted something and would discuss that. I think there's a lot of fear around eating disorders. I think there are a lot of schools that are afraid. There are schools that either think like, oh, we don't have that problem here, which I'm telling you they do.
It's not true.
And I even notice it in pockets. I always ask whenever I do an intake and I'm talking to families, I always ask them, what high school is your daughter in? Because I tell them it gives me a broader perspective of kind of the whole picture, like where they're coming from. But I've also noticed pockets. I've noticed pockets in schools. There is a contagion factor when it comes to eating disorders. So I've noticed pockets in schools, and I've had situations. There's like one particular school I'm thinking in my head, which I'm not going to say, but it's not even necessarily the full-blown eating disorders, but I had a nutritionist reach out to me telling me how girls from this particular school, like she was getting so many girls that were coming that they needed to gain weight, hadn't developed sort of full-blown eating disorder, but she was trying to work with them. And there was even like a girl from the school that knew how much her uniform weighed so that she could take off that number when she was being weighed. There was definitely something going on in that school. But also, even though everything originates from the Torah, they still feel like, it's not a Torah source. So that's sometimes some places are hesitant also with that, even though there are a lot of things that have come from places that didn't seem like Torah sources that as a frum community we're able to utilize. So it takes time. And also it's not my day job, you know, so I have to still stick with what I'm, you know, my main, my main mission statement is and work with the families and do the referrals that I can. But it's definitely something we have a website.
Oh, nice.
Ourprojecteverybody.com. Yeah.
So I'll just ask one more question and then we should go to other things. But in the program, do you mention the word eating disorder?
So definitely. I mean, one of the first, it's 4 sessions. It's a 4-session intervention, and there are written things, there are oral things, there are activities that you do. And one of the first parts of the session is identifying the appearance ideal, right? What is the appearance ideal? You know, to look that certain way. Well, what does that look like? If you think of an advertisement, right? So what does that advertisement look like? Oh, long legs, very slim, gorgeous hair, perfect skin. That's the appearance ideal. Right? So then we talk about what's the cost of the appearance ideal.
Okay.
Right? And the cost are what are the things that we do. You know, the diet industry is, I don't even know how many billions of dollars a year it is now. You know, what are the health costs? And eating disorders are mentioned in that, you know, as well.
No, I'll tell you why I'm asking, because people have this idea that if you like mention these things, then it's going to put ideas in people's heads.
So that there is a basis behind that. What it is that we don't want to make triggering comments. You know, and there's Dr. Fisher from LIJ actually told me this. You know, I remember where I was. It was a conference somewhere, and he and I were schmoozing for a few minutes, and we were talking about prevention. This was years ago, before I even knew about this program. And he said to me that he used to go and speak to schools and kind of come down and warn them, you know, warn the students, you know, this is, you know, what can go wrong. And he said he once had a girl come in for an evaluation, and she was bulimic, and he was like saying to her, you know, he was saying to her, you know, where did you get this idea from? What made you start, you know, why are you, you know, throwing up? You have to stop that. And she's like, what do you mean, Dr. Fisher? You came to my school. You told us all about it.
Wow.
So you need to be careful. You don't want to talk about specific symptoms, right? So you don't want to walk in there saying, you know, these are the exact symptoms of an eating disorder. This is how they restrict their calories. This is how they count their calories. This is what they do. This is what compensatory exercise is. You don't want to go in and talk about those details, because those can be triggering. And, you know, kids, they're going to be like, well, that's not going to happen to me. Right? I'm not going to let it get that far. But so that's really what the concern is. It's not talking about eating disorders on a whole. It's talking about those specific symptoms, even self-harm and suicidality, right? There is that contagion factor, and you have to be careful with how it's discussed, But I want to talk about men with eating disorders before we stop.
I wanted to have that question too.
Yes.
So I definitely wanted to mention that. Also, of the cases that I see, I mean, it's interesting, you know, you're talking about the guys who are going to the gym. The ones that I see, I think are coming more from the religious side. I get a fair bit of men with eating disorders that have started out more from an OCD scrupulosity place. You know, they don't want to indulge. They maybe, you know, have issues with the bathroom and davening, so they're not going to eat as much. And then they start to lose weight.
Interesting.
Yeah, they start to lose weight. I've had a few Hasidic men in eating disorder programs, you know, residential facilities, because this is how it started. Because then the more weight they lose, the more obsessive, the more anxious, the more rigid, the more depressed they become, until it just becomes this animal in and of itself. Because I have had a few men that were bulimic, but again, because it can be hidden so well, and because people don't know to look at guys for this, like it's sort of like a female disorder, they can hide it even more. And a lot of guys, they go away for yeshiva, they're not home. You know, also like 14, 15, 16, you know, they're out of the house.
Right, but what about the excessive working out, just because you brought up working out?
Right, so I definitely think body image with it. I mean, can we just talk about skinny pants for a minute? Like where did skinny pants come from? Like my little kid is wearing skinny pants and these slim cut suits. Like where did that even come from, this slim cut suits? So there's definitely a lot of body image stuff going on with guys as well. And I think they're more likely to do dangerous things, to make themselves, working out extra, being, you know, more thin, maybe, you know, using unhealthy means of achieving their goal, because they don't have the inborn warning signs. I mean, I always say, you know, and again, I don't know who your audience is, but I always say it's a great thing that girls have periods, because otherwise I'd probably get 50% less calls.
Right.
Because that's really the warning sign that the parents, and the calling. I have parents who call me that, their daughter's like 19 and, very kindly, I try and say to them, what made you decide to call now if this has been going on for so long? And they'll say, well, she's starting shidduchim and she's still not getting her period. Right. So because men don't have that, like there's no warning sign that something's wrong, right? There's no warning sign that something's wrong. I think they're much more likely to really push themselves and do unhealthy things. And, and you see these extreme diets and where they lost a bunch of weight and then they gain it back and then they've got their beer belly and, weight around the middle is much more unhealthy also for the heart, things like that. So I definitely think there's a lot of stuff going on with guys as well that could and should be improved, but that I'm not quite sure how to do.
What's your opinion on intermittent fasting? It's very in now.
Right.
It sounds like if you step back, people lose a lot of weight from it, but if you just think about it, it sounds like it would be something unhealthy, not eating and then not eating and that back and forth. What's your...
Like I said, first of all, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I also add, I'm not a rabbi and I'm not God. So that being said, you have to take my answers, in the way that they're intended. But I have not seen any data to support that any method besides eating in moderation and regular exercise leads to continued and sustainable weight loss. Like I said, it's $1 billion industry. Everybody's constantly trying to find the latest fad and what's going to work. Eating in moderation, a variety of foods, exercising regularly is really the only thing that I've seen any data to support, having any long-lasting effects. And the more you restrict, there was one study, I before COVID, I used to try and go to the Academy for Eating Disorders conference every year. I mean, thousands of people and billions of dollars of money on research to treat eating disorders. And I remember they talked about one study. It was fantastic. I mean, I'm just calling it the donut study. I'm sure it had a better name. But what they did was they had... and pardon any scientists out there that hear this and know the real details behind it. I'm sorry if I'm butchering this. But they basically had 2 rooms, right? So one person, 2 rooms with a plate of donuts in it. So person A goes into the first room. They say, you cannot eat any of the donuts. You just have to sit here. Person B goes into the second room. They say, you can eat as many donuts as you want. An hour goes by. They then go back to person A. They say, now you can eat as many donuts as you want. Person A ended up eating more donuts after they had to hold themselves back for an hour than person B, who was able to eat it whatever they wanted. So the more you restrict yourself, it always comes back to bite you psychologically. So, you really don't want something that's a highly restrictive diet. You want, again, something in moderation, something where you're not going through excessive periods of being hungry. And where you're eating a variety of food groups. You think about the old food pyramid from when we were kids, right? Every food item is still on that pyramid. They don't say never have sugar and never have oil, just in smaller amounts.
Right.
So yes, I'm not a big fan of intermittent fasting.
Got it.
Okay. We're running out of time, but I do want to focus on something because I think a lot of listeners would find this helpful. If someone has a friend or I guess a child or sibling, I guess someone close to them that is struggling with an eating disorder or they believe they are, what are some, I guess, tips in terms of what to say, what not to say? Because you're talking about triggering.
Right. So that's
people don't know how to navigate this.
Right. So it's a really broad question because it also depends on if you're talking about someone who has anorexia or not. Because, again, when they have anorexia, they're malnourished. They're cognitively impaired. They're not thinking clearly. So, a lot of times I'll have parents, let's do it like that. Let's focus more like on a parent, right? Yeah. So what I tell parents is that you don't need your child's endorsement to get them the help that they need. And I often have parents who feel like, well, she said she'll only go to a nutritionist, or she said she'll only go to a young therapist, or only someone with red hair, or someone with blue eyes. They're so busy trying to make the child happy that they don't want to upset them, that they're losing sight of what's really going on. Like I say clearly to parents, if you thought your child had a brain tumor, would you be, not taking her out of school because you don't want to upset her and make her miss class? Like, what would you be doing? Right? This is a life-threatening illness. So I think, maybe, again, because your question really was so good but so broad, that I would focus on just trying to tell the family member to really think, if I was afraid this person had cancer, what would I do? Because I think people get stuck. Then it's an eating disorder. Oh, I'm nervous, so I don't know how to say it. I don't know what to say. If you thought this was a life-threatening illness, what would you do?
Yeah, but look, let's assume it was, this wasn't an eating disorder. It was, let's say, addiction for opioids, right? Or any other issue. Right. Many people would say a person has to hit rock bottom. Right?
We don't do that with this. No, I hear you're right.
Like, so why here do we say we grab you and drag you to therapy?
Because the person's gonna die. That's rock bottom.
But
people can overdose.
But it's not. It's also not only that though. But the longer they are sick with the illness, the harder it is to get rid of. That I think is also, I think that's also the big difference is that the longer that they have the illness, the more malnourished they become, the more difficult it is to get rid of it. When I get someone who calls their daughter's 22, 23, it's a different story than when they're 14. And
there's
that's
no
why
bounce back from the bottom, basically.
No, definitely not a bounce back from the bottom because it's so ingrained in them. What's a treatment for an addiction? Abstain. That's it. You got to be clean. You can't go back. How can you can't abstain from food. Food is always around you. So you're always going to be, am I hungry? Am I full? Right? Am I heavy? Am I not? Should I eat? Should I not? Yontif, holidays. There's food all around. So the longer you're sick with this, the harder it is for you to still navigate that world. The quicker we can get rid of it. I'll have parents who will be like, well, I'm afraid to make it worse. Right? I don't want to talk about it because I'll make it worse. And I'll tell them if you go to the right person and get her the right help, you're not going to make it worse. You're just going to get rid of it more quickly. Right. So that's really the difference. That's really the difference as well. So the quicker we act, the quicker we can get rid of it, and the greater the chances of a full recovery. So that's really why.
You mentioned earlier, and I remember reading this in a book I was reading on Steve Jobs. I think I mentioned it on the podcast. I'm just in love with this book. He I believe had some sort of eating issue. He would not have anything besides apples or have only fruit juices, and I think he discusses, or the author discusses and I think you mentioned this also, like the high a person can get by not eating, and then that rush of eating. Do you feel like that has a effect on do people chase after that?
Again, it could be what starts something out, but each time they have to do it more, and then it sort of develops a life of its own. Where they're no longer in control. Again, that goes back to the egocentric nature of it. And when we talk about the adolescents, they're no longer in charge anymore. The eating disorder has taken over. So it may have started out like, oh, I felt so good about myself because I didn't eat the entire day and I felt so in control. And then when I ate, it felt so good. But what happens is that each time they've got to go that bit further and then until they're no longer in control of it anymore at all. So, look, there's always going to be people with these disordered eating behaviors and people with these type of OCD-like food behaviors, but we really need to just stop it from, becoming a full-blown eating disorder because that's when, it's much, much more difficult and they have to have really that extra support and intervention.
Okay. Could you talk just for a minute about what that intervention looks like?
Yes. So, and I feel like there's just so much to talk about.
I know.
So treatment really, so I guess the main thing that I want the listeners to sort of understand is that treatment for adolescents is different than treatment for adults. Okay. Adolescents are not small adults. They really are their own, they have their own, cognitive abilities. They have their own developmental, abilities, and we really need to treat it differently. So the first line treatment for an eating disorder with an adolescent, again, we're talking typical anorexia and bulimia, but for sure anorexia is something called FBT. FBT stands for family-based therapy. It used to be known as the Maudsley method. It's a family-based intervention for the treatment of eating disorders. It's not everyone sitting around kvetching about each other in a group. It really is a family treatment. The philosophy behind it is that the kid is no longer in charge of their eating. The eating disorder has taken over. So we as parents have to take away control from the eating disorder. It's got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, which I love because that means there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has the highest rate of recovery and the lowest rate of relapse of any other evidence-based method. So it's the penicillin of eating disorder treatment, meaning it's going to be my first line recommendation for the majority of families. Now, I'm allergic to penicillin, so it's not for everyone, right. But it's definitely the majority of times I do encourage parents to look into it and to try and see if that's what they could do. Now, when we're talking about adults, it's a lot harder. Right? So it's a lot harder. So often they'll try something called Cbte, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Enhanced, for eating disorders. There's also been a lot of research to show DBT could be helpful as well.
What's DBT?
DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. It is an offshoot of Cbte where it works on a lot of mood regulation, emotion regulation. So it's like learning a new language to manage your feelings and the world around you, sort of. So there's DBT, and then psychodynamic as well, but really it depends on how weight compromised they really are.
What's psychodynamic?
Psychodynamic is basically looking back on your childhood and your life experiences and how they impact the way you view the world around you. Am I saying that right? You're the psychologist.
It's like Freud.
Stuff. But it's lighter than, Freud and real psychoanalysis. But psychodynamic can also be helpful, but again, not if the person is really very, very low weight.
Right. So a piece of all of these interventions is also going to be getting them to a healthy weight.
Exactly.
So,
a lot of
so
times.
they don't have medical
I
issues.
have a lot of girls that are in the hospital.
Right.
I have a few cases right now that they're in the hospital. I have people that have gone to facilities multiple times. The older they get, the longer they're sick with this, the higher the chances of them needing a higher level of care.
So if someone takes a look back at that they've recovered, what do they, if you have spoken with them, what do they say? Like when they look at a photo of themselves, looking back, like, how was I ever like that? Like, how is that? How does that look?
No,
like, how does that conversation?
So it really does. I mean, it's amazing because I think it's more, again, when we're talking about the anorexics more than the bulimics, it's like, it wasn't them. It doesn't feel like it was them. And I have cases where, I've had families that had to take someone, against their will to the hospital. They had to call Hatzalah or call the police and have them admitted involuntarily to the hospital because they were no longer thinking. But I have a nice sort of part of my wall by my desk that I have a couple chasana invitations. I have 2 baby pictures there. People do get better. They really, really do. But they recognize also. I remember talking to one woman. She's like, yeah, my therapist knows already. If I'm cranky, she just gives me a cookie. Like I have to, she constantly has to make sure that she doesn't let herself go down in weight. Like she has to maintain her physical well-being to keep her emotional well-being, going as well. So, but people do get better, thankfully. Otherwise, I could not be doing this for as long as I have.
You have any good stories? Any
good stories? There's a lot. I think, like I said, if I didn't have good stories, I couldn't continue with what I'm doing.
Any one memorable one?
One particular story. I think that really parents don't understand how much nutrition makes a difference to mood. And there was one particular, I remember, someone actually called Rabbi Babad first. And there's a lot of other people in my office just besides him and me, but he's like the only one I keep referencing. They called him up because, their daughter was really moody and difficult, and they tried one therapist and it wasn't helpful, and she's a picky eater. So, Rabbi Babad's great with delegating. She's like, oh, picky eater food. Okay, you got to talk to Mrs. Levinson. And in the course of the conversation, we really saw that she really had always been a picky eater. The family went on a diet. She went on a diet. They didn't realize. And she actually developed an eating disorder, and they weren't even aware because it happened so slowly. And so, I sent them for an evaluation for someone who specialized in eating disorders, and they got her into treatment. And what was amazing is that really within a year, the moodiness, the edginess, the irritability, it was all gone. It had all come from the malnutrition. So it's amazing how much nutrition really can put into play. But, like I said, that story of I have one young lady who was, sent to the hospital involuntarily, and I've got the picture of her baby on the wall, and, how challenging that was for her. But I feel like the thing is, why do we have this eating disorder division? Each person's experience, whenever I talk to someone, I say, okay, so what worked? Like when I do get these calls, I'm like, so what worked? And I'm just going to duplicate it, and I'm just going to give it to everyone. And I really see that each person's experience is so unique. And it's almost like being in the right place at the right time and being in the right moment for recovery makes such a difference. So like I'll have people who said, look, I've been in facilities already. I just had this woman, I spoke to her 2 weeks ago. She hasn't had her period in like 7 or 8 years. Married with kids, hasn't had her period in 7 or 8 years. She's kind of this kind of chronic, low, smoldering eating disorder. Like she's not so sick that she's can't manage throughout her daily functioning, but she's not functioning to her best. And she was like, I've already been in a facility, it's not going to help me. And I said that, it's not like, well, I took penicillin for 10 days. If I take it again, it's the same thing. It's different every time. If she goes back again now, she's at a different place. Maybe she's more frustrated. Maybe she's had enough. Maybe it's finally going to kick in more. Maybe she'll have a different therapist. So I think that's something I really want to leave people with also. Just because they've been in treatment perhaps and it wasn't helpful or wasn't helpful enough doesn't mean they should give up. That there's still, you have to keep fighting the fight and trying. But that's what I do.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Can you end with one final thing?
Yes.
For people listening who have like no personal experience with this, no one in their family, they have, little kids, let's say.
Yeah.
So this isn't, it's like on the horizon, but not yet. What can they do in terms of promoting just like healthy body image from a young age?
Totally. First of all, be kind to yourself and be kind to your kids. I think like so many times as parents, we don't recognize what we're saying in front of our children. Like, I can't believe I ate that at the kiddush. I'm so fat. Watch what you're saying in front of your children. I think there are ways, and again, that's something that the program touches on. There are ways that we are inadvertently promoting this appearance ideal without recognizing it. When you meet your friend and you say, you look great, did you lose weight? You're promoting the thin ideal. When you are complimenting people on weight loss and their appearance rather than their achievements or things like that, that's also, promoting that. So watching what you say, making sure that you're not making those comments in front of your kids. And also, as far as with your kids, like my kids know there's no bad foods and good foods, right? It's not like that's fattening. Like if one of my kids come home, they want to, I want a snack bag, I'm starving. So, okay, I don't know is that really going to fill you up? How about let's find something that's really going to fill you up? They say, no, it's for sure going to fill me up. I say, okay, fine. But I want you to eat it with an apple and a cup of milk, which is a weird combination. But at least, the message they're getting is that you can have that treat, but you still have to make sure you're having something that's nutritionally balanced as well. So making sure we're not making these negative body image comments, making sure that we're not focusing on calories, but rather health and well-being and nutrition and understanding what's normal childhood development. I remember going to a kid's clothing store and it's terrible. Everything's slim cut. Everything's slim cut now. And this poor little girl was in this little pencil skirt. And I remember the mother patching her belly saying, oh, she's got such a pot. She's got such a pot. And I felt so bad for this little kid. So just recognizing that little kids are not adults and are not supposed to look like adults. So just watch what you say and bear that in mind. That's what I would say.
No, thank you. That's like really relevant, great advice. I feel like we could stay for so much longer.
Yeah,
but
that was
we're going over time. But thank you so much for coming.
It was my pleasure.
I really enjoyed.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. If you or someone you know needs some help, relief is just a call away. Call 24/7 if it's an emergency. You could reach them. They'll get through. They'll answer. You could either send them an email at info@reliefhelp.org or you could give their office a number, 718-431-9501. So it's not just eating disorders that you could call them about. It could be OCD, it could be anger management, it could be marital, it could be anything that is emotionally draining for you. Call Relief. If there's an idea, if there's an issue that's happening in the mental health space of the Frum community, let us know on livingl'chaim.com. We are more than happy to try to tackle that issue. The Klestzicks are getting an outpouring of suggestions and ideas, and we want to address and reach all of you with great episodes, but we can't do it without your ideas. So we get a lot, but we always want more, because the more we hear people struggling with a certain topic or challenge, the more we say, okay, we got to do an episode on that. We have some incredible, amazing episodes coming up. So if you're not yet subscribed to us on YouTube, go to Living L'Chaim and subscribe. If you're watching this, hi, you're here. Just press subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, first off, give us a 5-star review and share it with someone who would appreciate these episodes. You don't know what people are going through, and you never know. Maybe this episode could save someone's life. I know it sounds cliche, but it's really true. The feedback, the emails that we get, it's the most empowering feeling ever to continue doing what we're doing. It's these episodes, this podcast is reaching people, it's changing lives, and we thank you for sharing it with the people that it's helping, and we want to help more. So please be on our team to help. Till next time, stay safe. Living L'Chaim.